Hello Thistledown gang, welcome back to my channel if you've already been here. If not, hello. It is wonderful to have you here, please stay, and by that I mean subscribe. Today's little project is this. I am doing a little dye experiment. It's also part of Fetch Quest, because today we are dyeing the fabric for Fetch's first shirt. These are the pieces of a very basic shirt. It's pretty basic. They don't change much between the Renaissance and, you know, I think they change, but the basic construction of a shirt stays the same. So, okay, that's that. And this is a cone of black tea. And now you might say, hey, it's tea dye. We've seen it before. We've all done it before. Yeah, that might be. There have been several videos on that, like probably hundreds. But, first of all, check your crafting privileges. Not everybody has done everything before. And maybe there are people here who can actually benefit from that. And on the other hand, we're not just doing a tea dye, but we're doing a tea dye first. Let's head over to the kitchen.
Tea dye is in fact the perfect gateway craft to botanical dye. It doesn't require much, it's not poisonous, you get the stuff in every supermarket, and it doesn't even need a mordant before. That's the stuff you usually treat your fabric with before dyeing to bind the pigment to the fiber, because the tannin in the tea actually already acts as one. All you need to do is boil up a big pot of water and add a fudge ton of black tea. I also add some salt because it breaks open the fibers a bit more, but it's not even necessary. Let the tea steep too long and now you have a salty, bitter pot of tea, and that's exactly the way we want it. And then you just go and put your fabric in there. Make sure it's covered with tea all the way, and if you want an even dye, maybe soak it first, but that's it. You can either simmer it or leave it overnight, and especially linen and cotton don't suffer from either of that.
Botanical dyes have a few very interesting properties. One of them being the adjustment of the hue according to the acidity of the water used. That's fantastic, but I won't delve into that. But the property that I want to explore with you today is that every botanical dye can be dulled with metal. Not just any metal, we are talking about basically rust. If you've ever done tea dye before and you had pesky little blackish spots on your freshly tea dyed garment, that is probably because you used tea bags with metal clamps in them. I didn't realize that for a very, very long time. I always thought it was maybe something about my pot or anything, but it turns out it was just the tea bags all along. This is why I usually use loose tea by now or just take them out. But today I want to utilize this thing that is actually kind of annoying sometimes, and we'll just see how that goes. And this is where these things come in. These funny things are the bristles of street cleaning vehicles. I've always had a bit of a fascination with them. I always used to pick them up when I was a kid, and my grandmother wasn't exactly thrilled about it because, you know, they are rusty, they are dirty, you don't know where that has been. But a few months ago I realized that they might actually come in handy in a little dye experiment. So what they are is these very thin, very flexible pieces of metal. And I thought, hey, you know what? You could basically, I guess you could, because they rust, they are not rust-free, they are not stainless, you could probably dye patterns into a fabric. So, back to our freshly dyed stuff.
My first approach was just laying out my slightly wrung out fabric and placing the bristles on it in a stripe pattern. Even though I thought I had a lot of the bristles, I ran out of them far too soon, so I tried to substitute with some rusty wire I had around, and then resorted to take the ones from the start and just use them again. My second approach was simply painting on stripes with rust water I have around for the general saddening of dye. I liked how the bristles worked with the thinner bits of fabric, and I also tried out printing with an iron trivet I had around. I continued to splash water over the iron bits because I felt like This worked better the wetter the fabric was. I mean, that makes sense, right? When I got to the sleeves, I started pressing and dragging the bristles against the fabric, leaving very clear lines. I should have definitely worn gloves for this, but no, instead now I have cuts on my fingers and my hands stayed grey for 2 days and my nails still look messy. The whole ordeal might have been easier if I had more patience to let the strips oxidize for a bit longer, because the intensity varies a lot between the stripes. I was, however, pleased to see them show up on the other side of the fabric as well, and almost just as clear. Even though that worked quite well, I tried to go for something a bit less time-consuming by dipping a piece of rope into my rust water and placing it on the fabric, which I guess could have worked if the fabric and rope had been tightened, but like this it mostly got me a splotchy mess. But that's what experiments are for, isn't it? Splotchy messes. I went with the annoying finger cutting because not glove wearing but clear method for the last 2 parts. I had made up the front of the shirt before the whole dye part and now seized the opportunity to do something with a rather wide placket. I decided to do a fishbone chevron thing, first marking the edges with a bristle, and yes, that first one was in the wrong direction, and then I filled in every second part with the very sediment of the rust water in hopes it would darken in combination with the tannin of the tea, but it would still be okay if it stayed like this. I also painted the trivet with rust sediment again to see if I could get a more clear print of it on the back of the shirt. It took a few times, but in the end I was really pleased with how crisp the print actually came out. I threw the whole thing back in a pot with the same tea as before, but that was now saddened with all the iron from the bristles that I'd dipped and left in there between making stripes, for a bit more grey and in the hope of getting the orange parts to do that dark grey thing, but well, they didn't. Assembling this thing, I figured out that this shirt probably wasn't made for fetch, but rather is a hand-me-down from wherever, or she plain nicked it, I don't know. I sewed with my old Singer instead of the electric machine, not because it's historically accurate, because, I mean, fetch is, if anything, kind of conquistadorish, and this thing's from the 30s, and is only feasible from, I'd say, 1900.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot these. These are the armpit rectangle thingies that I don't know the word for right now. So you have no idea how much it annoys and upsets me that I cannot, for the life of me, recall the name for these armpit rectangle thingies right now. So I have to look it up. I mean, come on. Gusset! Gussets! Thank you, book, for reminding me. You know, so in German we have a word that is Wortfindungsstörung, which means that you cannot for the life of you remember a word that you usually know. And that is so frustrating, especially because I am not a native speaker and I always feel invalidated and impostorish when I cannot recall my vocabulary. The problem is I use a lot of English in my everyday life, and sometimes I have the same problem with German words.
But I like Effie, and also she's always loaded with white thread most of the time. I usually join my pieces and then fill them to have the least bulky seams I can possibly make. But in this case I just stitched everything together and kept the felling for later because I really wanted to get over and done with this thing and see how it looked. I hate putting in gussets because in the end it should be perfectly logical, but I still managed to pin them to all the wrong parts of the shirt all the fudging time. This time one side ended up at the collar of all places. I mean, the heck? How? I didn't want to bore you too much with the whole shirt construction part, that's not why we're here today, but I might make a more detailed video about that in the future. Let me know in the comments if you like that.
we're done. I could have probably made the sleeves a bit shorter. They do a lot of billowing, but mostly to the front. I could have put another button here, and maybe I should tweak the idea for the color just a tiny bit, because I cut the front part a bit wider than the back part to accommodate for my chest. It is very comfortable though, but I might have to, you know, experiment with that a bit further. I am generally quite pleased with it. I am a bit sorry that you can't see the stripes as much as I had hoped, but it will probably end up as Fetch's sleeping shirt, because I do like having ambience appropriate night clothing, so I can just, you know, stumble out of my tent and be ready to play whenever, and still feel good about that, and not, you know, wear pyjamas with little teddy bears on them. Not that I have those. I mean, I wouldn't mind having pyjamas with teddy bears on them, but I don't. But aside from that, I did cut the back longer than the front on purpose, actually, but I should have probably made a slit here. I can still do that. I haven't done any felling with this thing yet. Actually, I didn't even plan on doing the cuffs for the end of this video, but I was already doing the collar, and then I thought, hey, why not just do the cuffs as well? I might actually, maybe I should just do a bit of folding action here to make it sit a bit tighter. You might see that in a video at some point if I do something like that. But I still have, as I said, a bit of felling to do, and also here the seams, but I wanted to get this over and done with so I can go on to editing. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this experiment was interesting to you too. It sure was for me. It was not what I expected. I had hoped for the stripes to be a bit more visible. I think I might have to do some more experimenting in that regard. If you have experience with dyeing patterns into fabric using natural dyes, hit the comments. Please do it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for giving me the attention that I so desperately crave. If you wanna subscribe, like, it probably helps the channel and the algorithm thing, whatever. Be nice to yourself, be kind to others, these are weird times. Stay enchanted, and farewell.